Transference. Transference is not an easy thing to spot. Transference and contra-transference are actually phenomena which had been firstly discovered by Jung and Freud. So Jung took it to another level, and Freud he set the ground for it, according to what we know from Eurocentric psychology, right? So Jung he insisted that the power of transference and counter-transference is intoxicating, but also necessary to address. He also claimed that transference and counter-transference, they're very similar, but they also let us know that as humans, it is our natural inclination to identify another person for what we know about humanity. And that makes transference and counter-transference a natural phenomena accordingly to its forefathers, and that's Freud and Jung, okay? So transference is when you're displacing, you're projecting your emotions or your attitude from one person to another. It happens a lot. In relationships, not only in therapy. You just need to be aware of it. And counter-transference is when therapist's unconscious reactions become a problem because he's projecting that to client. So that both of those, they need to be challenged in therapy, but how to spot them? So when the transference happens, a client brings probably the whole story, whole life story of old relationships into new relationships. And you as a therapist, you see this pattern. You need to stop the client and show the similarities, show the links. And that is obviously unconscious process. So it's hard to spot for anyone on personal level. The transference, therefore, can be positive and negative because it can help relationships, but most likely because they're with you in the therapy, it's kind of counterproductive. And both of them, they do occur also between you and your client if you're a therapist. And the positive transference can lead to a person experiencing acts of kindness, acts of being concerned, acts of being caring and helpful towards you as a therapist. Another type of transference when it is negative is felt opposite. It's felt through anger, resentment, sometimes attack, tantrums as well. Clients, they can have tantrums. And this has to be, as I've mentioned so many times already, addressed. And how to address is to stop your client and stop the flow if you notice that pattern, and be very open about it and say, I've noticed that it becomes kind of a pattern on our sessions that you're reacting this or the other to our meetings or to my person. And I'm just wondering, I have some concerns whether you are aware of it or not. Do you think that it might be linked to your relationship with your father or with mother, and do you think it's a form of projection here, because you feel safe and heard and nourished in a sense by my work with you? It has to be done in a really gentle way, as you can imagine. Now, there are different types of transference. As you've noticed in my advice, I've mentioned it might remind you about your mother or father. There's paternal and maternal transference, and even sibling transference, on non-familial transference as well, sexualized transference as well. So when we're talking about parental transference, it is therapist becoming a father figure to a client. So you as a therapist might be viewed as a very powerful, wise, authoritative person. And if you are being perceived as a mother, if you experience maternal transference in the session, then you're becoming idolized and addressed or expected to be loving and influential and nurturing. You almost can feel that expectations from you. If we're talking about not familiar transfer, and this is really interesting to people of faith, then you see that your relationship is going into a different path. You almost have inclination that there are some stereotypes about your person being created along the way. For example, you as a Christian or as an Islamic or as a Jewish, as a person of faith, but also as a therapist, faith-based therapist, you might be expected to fulfill the role of priest or fulfill the role of rabbi or fulfill the role of imam. So you can't be sinful. You in the eyes of your client, you as a therapist, you need to be holy, right? And that obviously creates problems, because we all make mistakes, even as therapists, with our clients, as much as we care for them and as much as we work towards their recovery. So those things, they do occur. There is also sexualized or erotic transference, and the difference is that when sexual transference occurs, sometimes a person in therapy might develop an attraction. And in terms of erotic transference, individual identifies unrealistic closeness, or even express fantasies, verbally fantasies, or gives a clues, such as to therapists, such as or the way you dressed today, or the way you walked into the room today. It made me alert, to say the least. So probably that is one of the reasons why Sharia protects us from those traps of therapy and alerts us to practice with the same gender. And if we are practicing not with the same gender, then make it really safe, very official, and not in seclusion. I'm referring to hadith which says if the man and the woman are in seclusion, there is a third person between them, and that is shaitan. So that's why it happens, right? Now, I don't know if you remember, but I've mentioned that this is all we know from the perspective of post-19th century psychology, but we also have indigenous psychology. And right now I want to refer to Quranic psychology, to traditions of the Prophet psychology, to Islamic psychology, as it were. So we know from Hadith that a believer is like a mirror to another believer. If he sees something wrong in him, he should correct it. That's how we know that nasiha is wajib. It's compulsory for us to be self-aware, to protect ourselves from the traps of transference and counter-transference, and challenge another person. So it can even happen in your relationships. If you having a spouse and you start expecting from your spouse to be your father or your mother figure, you need to stop yourself. Or if you see that in your spouse, then there is a place for us, for each one of us, and you need to draw your boundaries. So mirroring, actually, as mentioned here, belongs to very advanced psychological and Islamic counseling tools. The phenomena of transference and contra-transference, therefore, existed way before it had that name, and it was under the term called mirroring. And from Islamic perspective, we need to look into spiritual inclinations, perspective of subconscious, meaning nerves, and metaphysical, as I already mentioned, shaitan, but also jinn, called Qareen, and angels. aspects, because they do influence us on the level of self. And we also want to be very mindful and conscious of non-verbal and verbal clues of mirroring. So I am here talking not only about your body language mirroring the other person's body language, but also some kind of ambivalence is there. Okay. Now, from Islamic perspective, as I said, mirroring is quite a phenomena, and we could spend really a long time discussing it, but because of time concerns, we won't. I want to underline how important it is, because if you are at the stage of being told that the boundaries in your relationship with another person are being crossed, then it's not a point for you to grow into blame or self guilt. It's a point for you to realize that you are a person of growth, and that mirroring, that advice you've just heard, is a point of view to see that you actually struggling in your tarbiyah. And what I've just said, it refers both to client and both to therapist, because believe it or not, many times I find myself listening to my clients' struggles as they were mine in the past. And I always ask myself a question: do I as a therapist need to go over them again? Or is it a point for me to say, Alhamdulillah, this is behind me already? Is it the point for me to be grateful? Is it a sign, is it ayat for me as a therapist to realize that people are actually struggling with what I was struggling, and now I'm in position to show them some light? Okay. So that is the spiritual insight into transference and counter-transference. This is how I would work with Islamic psychology and healing tools. With that, I hope that was helpful. Don't forget to sign to my YouTube channel, AJS Therapy, and benefit from more videos like this. All right. Assalamu alaikum.